Hey everyone, welcome back to the Spiritual Underground podcast. As always, your host here, Dan Reeves. My podcast, if you're just running across this, primarily we're 12-step recovery related. I have a lot of people's stories on my channel where they've come in and tell their 12-step journey. And usually I like to sweep back into childhood too, because I think that's where it all begins, really. If we start out at the age a person starts drinking, you've clipped off probably the important parts. We start drinking later, most of us. But I also like to bring in guests that can help us do this thing. The 12 steps asks us to do is to continue to grow spiritually. And when I kind of put that out into the universe, it's phenomenal how many people uh, email me wanting to be on the show. So I put it out there and it manifested. And I get to meet just these wonderful people who are out trying to basically another thing the 12 steps says I need to do is says I need to help people. I need to have that as a piece of my being. I need to be out there trying to help people. And I keep on meeting these people who are spending the majority of their life energy, as I do, helping people. I think that's the most noble cause we have here on earth. So my guest today is Rachel White. What's it also go by? The flip that part out. What's tell me
The Skeptical Shaman. That's the name
yeah,
of my
there it is.
podcast.
I
Yeah.
clipped that part off. That also intrigued me when I saw that invitation. I rarely say no to anybody unless they're just coming from some weird angle, which doesn't
Right.
happen very often. But because I figure I didn't pick them; they got sent to me. And same thing when a sponsee, when a guy comes up and asks me to help him work these 12 steps, I don't really know that I got a choice to pick him. To say
Yeah.
no. He's come to me for help, and my job is to say yes. And the
It's
more I
funny you
say
say that.
yes in
I
life,
I just
go
wrote
ahead.
about this morning on Substack in the context of shamanism, not the 12 steps, but the idea of you don't really pick what comes to you, whether it's a totem animal or spirit guide or a human mentor or a client, who needs something from you. It really always makes sense afterwards, I always say. And there is an
Hmm.
order to things. It's a beautiful attitude to have. And you've already just exuded such as I jokingly, but not so jokingly call it, an attitude of gratitude. And I think we could all use a lot more of that these days. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if there's anybody that's got more little cliche sayings than 12-step recovery. I mean, somebody needs to put them all in a big book, but attitude of
Yeah.
gratitude is one that gets kicked around quite a bit. And it's true. When I got here, I had a hard time having much gratitude for anything. But as I practiced that, and it's like a big cruise
Yeah.
ship. It just took a while to make that big turn. It doesn't happen
Yeah.
fast. It takes time to get around it. And as I practice these things, now it's natural. That's just how I am. I don't have to try to have gratitude anymore. I
Yeah.
joke around.
And I'm really humbled to be here, by the way, because you don't know this. I'm sure, whatever that higher power is knows this. But earlier today I had an interaction that I had not planned on that was very upsetting. And I have a PTSD diagnosis and an OCD diagnosis because my childhood was not the best. It wasn't the worst either. There's that gratitude again, because I've met people and I work with people where, trust me, it gives you perspective. You pull your head out of your rear end very quickly in those
Hmm.
situations, and the pity party stops immediately. But what struck me about it was how triggered I got. And I don't use that word a lot. I'm not into like, safe spaces and trigger warnings, and that's not
But
my
that's
jam.
sometimes what happens.
Yeah, and life is a trigger, but it occurred to me that in this case, even though her behavior was out of line, and I'll share with you what happened right after this, but I need to engage in a more radical level of emotional and energetic sobriety. And I
Hmm.
was literally writing about that. And because if something's triggering me, yeah, she threatened to hurt me and whatever, and we could talk about that. But I grew up in Chicago. That's not that big of a deal. It's what it was about and poked at. Generally, if it gets that kind of a physical reaction out of me, my heart rate goes up or whatever. There's something in there that I haven't grieved yet, that I haven't looked at. So the post I'm writing on Substack is called Good Grief, which is a play on words, but also we don't look at grief as positive. And I think in this case, it's going to operate a little bit like a spiritual colonic. And it's my focus for December. And we're here on December 1st. It's a new
Yeah.
moon. I don't do any client facing work in December. And I joke that I schedule my mental breakdown. I organize it and I
A
schedule it and put it in the calendar every year. It's December. Yeah.
lot easier to manage that way. Uh,
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah. So
rather
I was
just have it
walking in
come
the
at you.
neighborhood and the weirdest thing happened. So I'm estranged from both of my parents. I have been from my father for longer. He was incredibly violent. So I was the first one to go. And, motherly abuse, narcissistic abuse is a little bit more subtle, I would say. And that takes a little bit longer to unpack. At least it did for me. And somehow my father got my private cell phone number and sent me a text this morning that his mother had died. So that was my morning walk. And so I
Mm.
put these headphones in and called my husband. I was just a couple blocks away and I was talking to him. I said, it's just weird, you're processing. And I was like, I assume she died a long time ago. Not that that's funny, but like, this is very surprising in a number of ways. And a woman just lurched off of her front porch from behind these bushes with a broom in her hand in her house coat, screaming at me for being on the phone on the sidewalk. I live in the middle of downtown Austin. It's a public easement, screaming at the top of her lungs, calling me every name in the book, threatening to hit me with the broom, threatening to call the cops. I mean, it was the most wild. You don't expect it. It was like a Jack in the Box, right?
Yeah.
And I go, honey, I gotta go. I hung up with my husband. I was like, I have to be present for what's happening. And I looked at her and I said, I'm your neighbor, right? Like I've interacted with you. And I said, my name's Rachel. And she goes, I know who you are. I said, okay. And I said, you understand there was a death in my family and this is all unexpected. She goes, the contempt you must have for everyone in this neighborhood to just be loud and ruin everybody's Sunday and just screaming and screaming and screaming and just nasty things. And I looked down, she had one of those yard signs where it's like, we love everybody. Love is love. Show compassion. And the irony of the whole setup was wildly kind of funny as it was upsetting, right?
Yeah.
But I get a little bit more spun out because I grew up with a lot of mental illness, drug abuse, physical abuse, and instability. And so when people act irrationally and they're aggressive towards me in their dysregulation, I have to go through a whole thought exercise because of the way I grew up, where I'm like, was it me? Was I being loud? Was it this? Was it, trying to figure it out? And it's like, oh my God. Next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by and it's
Yeah.
just still her in her house coat and I haven't moved on. And what it really is, that's my mother's behavior. I mean, it wasn't her today, right? I'm not a mental health professional. So these are just my opinions in case anybody gets excited about litigation, how narcissistic personality disorder works. But that's what it was just you're not breathing right. You're walking too loud. You're too happy. You're this, you're walking on eggshells, literally, like growing up that way. And I think in our society, there's been a lot of walking on eggshells because a lot of women like her, and it is specifically women I've noticed, side note, feel, deputized to kind of monitor and manage everyone else's private life, their beliefs, their feelings, their words, right? And she's irrational. So I wasn't going to explain to her there's a First Amendment because that ship has sailed, I'm sure, at some other point. She has her own trauma. But it was a moment of like, I can't control her and this behavior writ large, but I have to this month go deeper for myself in terms of why that gets my goat, because it always does. So emotional sobriety and being a shaman, energetic sobriety. So like the spiritual side of it, how am I doing? Am I taking care of myself? Am I being intentional, cogent? Do I really know what's going on? What am I really reacting to? Is it getting passed through a distortion field? And letting myself sit with that. So it's funny that we're having this conversation today. I'm literally writing about it.
Yeah. You know, Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous or co-founder. Can you hear me okay?
I can, but I didn't know his
Okay.
name was Bill Wilson. You just taught me something.
Yep. Bill Wilson and
Yeah.
Dr. Bob Smith is the other guy. Um, we will say, and you'll hear that we believe that book was divinely inspired because Bill was a drunken stockbroker that had no business writing something that ended up being as powerful and as helping as many
Yeah.
people as it has in the past almost 90 years. 1939, I think, is when it come out, and Alcoholics Anonymous was started in 35, so it'll be 90 years of program next month. It took them a while to get a book together. But anyway, he wrote a bunch of articles and they were in this magazine that was called The Grapevine, and it was like AA's magazine. Okay. And my very favorite one, and it actually was a topic of a meeting I went to in early recovery. With the article is known as, and it's titled as emotional sobriety, and it's almost a poem. Uh,
Wow.
it's and in this one meeting that when I went to, and I would love to know how all this worked out. I guess it worked out the way, just the way it was supposed to. But so many, like you said, looking in the rearview mirror, I can see it, right? I couldn't see it when I was standing in it, but I
Yeah.
can look in the rearview mirror and I can go, oh, cool. And I spent quite a long time with some people who were been in recovery for a while and some new people, studying and discussing and talking about that article Bill wrote called Emotional Sobriety. And we would read it at the beginning of the meeting each time. So it gets pounded into you,
Wow.
and you can
Yeah.
find it on the internet if you
I am going to
Google
go look
Bill
for it
Bill Wilson's
immediately.
emotional sobriety, it'll pop right up. So it's and it
Yeah.
is a real term. I mean, it took me years to feel that I was actually had some level of emotional sobriety. Even when I cut the dope and the booze, at I don't really know when it was. Someplace in the 4 to 5 years, I actually started feeling like I had some management over my emotions. That I actually
Yeah.
could deal with them and wouldn't be just flipping out over every little thing that happened, thinking I'm being attacked from any particular thing that happened in the day. Like that's just
Yeah.
straight up. You did get attacked today. That was, but there's also the ones. Uh, Bill has a line in there that says some of these resentments we have are fancied or real, and I look back at how many
Yeah.
of them that I'm making up. Right? It's not real.
Wow.
There's nothing coming at me. It was it was my reaction. I was triggered by something, and I go, well, part of the work we do too is to go back and look at
Yeah.
my, most of the time it come from something that happened in my childhood, and if I can do a little study and meditation on it, I can usually and like discussing it with my sponsor, or sometimes just my support group, my friends, we can come to the bottom of it. And I go, oh, and then once I know that reaction is coming, I can
Yeah.
better stave it off next time, right? And then I I
It's,
can
I can't
quicker.
believe you're saying this because you don't know this. I printed this quote out earlier today. It's from, are you familiar with Dostoevsky, Russian
Sure.
writer?
I can't
It's
say
a
that
little,
name, and me and my sponsor joke about it because I cannot say that name.
I don't know that that's a bad thing. And his books are really long and really sad. But I printed it out because I'm interviewing someone on my podcast tomorrow who is a cult survivor and a
Mm,
whistleblower. And he was featured in an HBO documentary series about the cult and the leaders serving 120 years in jail. And he's really, like you, now dedicated his life to service. Like he learned a great deal kind of alchemically through that process. Because I think he
mhm.
was in there for 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a long time. And just like, with people who get sober, there's this, oh my God, what have I done with 15 years of my life? And having to repair relationships because cults are expert level and getting you to destroy relationships and isolate yourself. And I was going to read this to him at the start of the podcast tomorrow. And it's what you were just talking about. Can I read it to you? It's
Read it.
crazy. All right. So again, I didn't write this. I'm not Dostoevsky at all. But he said, above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point where he does not discern any truth either in himself or anywhere around him, and thus falls into disrespect towards himself and others. Not respecting anyone, he ceases to love. And having no love, he gives himself up to passions and pleasures in order to occupy and amuse himself. And in his vices reaches complete bestiality. And it all comes from lying continually to others and himself. A man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? And surely he knows that no one has offended him and that he himself has invented the offense and told lies just for the beauty of it, that he has exaggerated for the sake of effect, and that he has picked up on a word or a mountain out, or made a mountain out of a pea. And he knows all of that, and still he is the first to take offense. He likes feeling offended. It gives him great pleasure, and thus he reaches the point of real hostility.
What's that from?
Uh,
What book is that from?
Brothers Karamazov, I
Uh-huh.
believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm an audiobook addict. I
this is a good one to put you to sleep, man. This is
yeah,
dense.
no, those were hard to get through. I had to take them in bites, and switch
Yeah, it's
off
like
and
my
listen to
Hebrew
something else.
studies. I was raised Catholic, but I studied Hebrew at Spertus, and it's like you want to go to bed at night. That's ASMR. You'll fall right asleep, man.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
dense and boring. But yeah, this idea that like not, to your point, things that are either perceived or real. See, some of these offenses are real and some are perceived, but getting into the truth of that and out of the lie of it, you remove the fuel to be offended. So you don't have to see it as an attack all the time. You don't have to internalize that or own that or carry that. It really is a burden. And the
Yes.
reason I printed this out for Mark is he's big on talking about right now as a cult survivor, our political climate and how ideologies are very cult like and very religious, and that everyone thinks being offended is a virtue. And it's actually a bit of a vice. And so you just gave me new depth and understanding of this that I did
That's
not
what's so
have
cool about these
before.
conversations. There's an
Yeah,
exchange that happens. And I love that's what I like to watch even podcasts all over the place because I get ideas that I wouldn't
yeah,
pick up anyplace else. But I really
yeah.
like it when I get to do it, face to face with somebody or, as close as we are here.
So what are, and I know this is an oversimplification, but what are your tricks for being emotionally sober? Do you have any tips for someone
Tips.
beginning the journey?
Well, that's a tricky question, because it was a practice,
Yeah.
isn't it? And I don't know that I really, we have these 12 steps that we go through and we work them is what we say. And that's usually, when you come in, you work these 12 steps and I watch time after time and it happened to me in 4 to 6 months, a guy's life will be transformed. Not only is he not drinking anymore, he's just a better
Hmm.
dude and he's happy and he's smiling more and
Yeah.
but then we practice these principles in our life, and I do, this is not actually in the big book, but my sponsor does a lot of work around forgiveness and being that, having that as a core value that I'm going to let you off the hook. That's now my default, where it never was
Yeah.
before. But it's taken a long time to get there, and a lot of forgiveness work. And most of it in the beginning was doing it with these people that were really hard to forgive in my life.
Yeah.
That were all my fourth step on my inventory about this person did this to me and this person did this to me,
Yeah.
and working on the forgiveness with those people, that just rolled into where I just don't take offense very easy. I mean, it takes a lot to rile me up, and I can't even think. I'll tell you, and I kind of funny about talking about this all of a sudden, but my daughter's been dealing with active addiction. She's for a few years,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
that'll be something. That's something that like I have trouble maintaining my stability
Yes.
when I'm confronted with that. She is doing well right now, so everything is on the upswing at the moment. But as with addiction, and it was that fentanyl, it was those fake pain pills that one of them was going to kill her sooner or later. You just don't know which
Yeah.
one it was going to be. And it's pretty spooky when you're going in your daughter's room at night a few times a night, watching for her to be breathing. And then when you see her breathe, then you can go back to bed. And that wrecked me. It made me sick in sobriety. I'm
Oh,
eight
yeah.
years sober, and I got sick and actually had my friends, some of my closest friends, had suspected that I relapsed because of my behavior.
Yeah.
And it was really wrapped up in codependency over my wanting to manage my daughter's addiction, which I don't have the power to do. I don't have the power to manage mine, let alone somebody else's. But I still got sucked into it, and it took a while. It took months of it before it like bubbled up enough that it got addressed. I wouldn't even know what was
Yeah.
going on. And my friends were too, well, these friends are sponsees. So they're afraid to confront their sponsor on an issue, right? And somehow or another, when I was communicating with my sponsor, I wasn't showing it, right? So unconsciously, I was playing the
Expert
game.
level management.
I was
Yes.
gaming it. Thankfully, those guys did finally end up saying something to me, and I got it out and worked with it. But it's just been a lot of years of operating under these principles that's helped me. That's about the best I can say of it.
And when
Uh,
you said you were gaming it, I want you to know that you don't have to have an addiction issue, past, present, or future, to be good at gaming.
yeah,
Yeah, that's something everybody's got going
yeah.
on. And sometimes it's the most clever of us and the most self aware that are the best at gaming ourselves and others. Yeah.
What are the bottles behind you?
Oh, these are my herbal tinctures. I make something called flower essences. So I
Oh,
grow
very cool.
All of these from organic seed in my garden in the backyard. My chickens, by the way, I don't know if you can hear them. They're making noise right now. So we have
Uh,
chickens out there as well. And this started, I never thought this was going to be a part of my business or my shamanic practice or anything, but it was during COVID in Chicago. I'm at home. I had been laid off. I welcomed it. Honestly, it was one of those weird serendipitous things where I was going to quit the next day.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I wrote my resignation letter. I made sure to go on vacation first, and I was being kind of bit of a pussy about it. I was going to send it in on a Friday night. My boss was in England, so he'd get it Saturday morning and we wouldn't have to talk or whatever. And so that wasn't an issue. But me laid off, and then a husband who's a chef who luckily was getting paid to just be at home because they got
Mm,
PPE loans and things like that, the restaurant. But at a certain point, you're in a little box in a very, very dense city, and you're not getting out, you're not doing the things you want to do. So I had a meditation center, like a commercial space, and a balcony on my home, and the commercial space had a roof deck. And I looked at my husband one day. I said, they're not letting us go to the park. I mean, they took the basketball hoops off the park. You couldn't run along the lakefront. You couldn't walk your dog. You couldn't, you want to talk about feeling like you're walking on eggshells, for right or for wrong. It was very tense, I would say. I need to grow things. Let's plant something. We just went to a little flower shop and bought seeds, bought plants, and did it and set up planters. And it was like a thing for us to do, and like touch dirt, like go outside, touch grass, touch dirt. And because he's a chef, at one point I said, we should think about if whether or not we want to make flower essences, because I bought them from various people and used them in my life. And we did, and I gave them away to friends. I made these labels and everything, like a little fancy gift before we moved, and I gave them to people, forgetting about it, literally. And then I started to get messages from them using them, and how they
mm,
were shifting things from them or connecting them. Because the basic concept is all these flowers or plants or trees have an energy. And when you ingest a gentle form of these are 80% water, really, it kind of imprints on you. And you're working with nature to like tune your energy body in a way, a direction you want to go. And it occurred to me I should try them after everybody else tried them, because they seemed to like them. And they worked. And no one was more surprised than me. I don't know why, but I just started making them and I sell them on Etsy. And frankly speaking, I believe in them. Obviously, I would buy them from other companies for years, literally decades. I was using flower essences, but the excuse to garden and to grow things and to care about things and to learn things, like my husband bought me a book on Korean natural gardening and making your own fertilizer and all this stuff. It has given me, that's a thing I'm intensely grateful for, is that that's
yeah.
my office most days, not right now because it's December, but to get out there and to do that. And it's real work. So much in our world is nonsense. I was in corporate America for 23 years. And there's aspects to it that are real, and it's not all negative, but it's not real the way that being out in your yard gardening is real.
Yeah.
And we've made really good friends with Eddie, who we met on TaskRabbit. I got him to come out and help me with some things in the garden, because my husband's a busy chef, right? And I don't have a lot of upper body strength. So Eddie showed up, Texan his whole life, never been outside of Texas, showed up in an InfoWars t-shirt, and I instantly fell in love with Eddie. And he goes in my backyard. And this is a great example of not judging somebody, because he goes, "You got a real nice spot here." I was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much, Eddie." And he goes, "No, seriously, there's like fairies here." And I was like, "Yeah, I know." Like it blew my mind. He's like, "You mind if I just sit down?" And I talked to him for a while. And I was like, "Nothing has ever made me happier. Can you put?" And just this, we have this great kinship, and we give him eggs from the chickens. And when he comes back, he tells us about how he made them, what he made with the eggs. And we text directly now. And he's just become our friend. And, like Eddie's like my garden friend. Like he gets it. And
Yeah.
he's never going to retire because he loves being outside. And we formed this unlikely bond. And I look forward to him coming and helping with the leaves and stuff.
It is so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. When these people
Yeah.
get put into your life at just the right
Yeah.
time and all that
Well,
just
and I
lines
gave
up.
him some of my essences, and he's like, "I don't think they're working." I was like, "It's okay, Eddie. You don't have to say anything nice. It's like a whole woo spiritual thing. You don't have to be into it. It's fine." Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, well, just a parallel. I was an engineer for 28 years at a place here in Louisville, Kentucky. And in March of 2019, they come tap me on the shoulder. And
Yeah.
that's virtual because I had a premonition the day before. and I'm also went to yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
So I'm a certified yoga teacher, and my test was that Saturday. So I was planning on taking off Friday because, like I do, I waited to the last minute to study for it, to do any more
Yeah.
work on it. And so on Thursday, I'm at work and I thought I had a premonition and I sat down and I pushed all my personal stuff off the computer up onto the cloud. And I packed up all my shit and put it in my backpack and went home like I was never coming back. But I really didn't know that was what was going to happen. And when I called in the next morning, because I didn't get any
Yeah.
notice that I wasn't going to be there tomorrow, I left a voicemail on my boss's thing and he called me back. And when he said his voice, he said, "Hey, Dan, whatever her name with HR is sitting here with me."
Yeah.
And she explained to me that I didn't have a job anymore. And so they didn't really tap me on the shoulder, but I like telling it that
Right.
way. But somehow I knew the day before because they'd have let me come back and get my personal belongings. That they would have done that, but they would not have let me back in that computer system. I promise you. And I had
Yeah.
I think everybody does have a lot of stuff on their computers that they probably not. They gave us a drive, even you had a little drive area, personal space, but you weren't supposed to put anything on it personal.
Yeah.
But I had a bunch of stuff I didn't want to lose, and I was able to, I had all that stuff. And then like that morning, I got laid off, and I'm like, wow, I knew that yesterday. I knew it,
You know what's
and nobody.
funny is I had the premonition too, but I misread it. And I'm psychic, man. People pay me for that for a living. You'd think I'd dial in more, but when it's you and you're in it, it's hard to see. And I thought I had to do it. So I was getting all these things organized. I thought I was in control, that I needed to be the one to end it. And so when it happened, I was like, it was such a reminder that all
Yeah,
I had to do was receive the inevitable.
yeah,
And there was no homework for me to do, but
that's
to
so
receive
cool.
it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I got golden parachute. I don't know what your situation was,
I
but I was
did.
pleased.
I was pleased too. I was,
Yeah, you want to
they
be in the
did me
first
good.
round.
I didn't have any hard feelings about it.
Yeah.
I was still shocked. There was a
Hmm.
shock that I was like, kind of like I was triggered in some way that was like,
Yeah.
I'm actually, I'm happy about this. My heart wasn't in it anymore. I was just going through the
Right.
motions at work and I've been doing the same job for a long, long time. And frankly, I was bored with it. It wasn't challenging me anymore. And, and I'd worked there for 24 years as a drug addict and alcoholic. And I worked 4 years sober and they turned me loose. I think that's a little
Yep.
funny. They kept me for a long time, but, I was also a yes man back in those days. And when I got sober, the emperor's clothes, I started noticing they weren't on and things like, this is weird stuff we're doing here in corporate
Oh,
America. I
yes.
mean, this, and I quit, uh, I had a little circus music on my phone that I would play once in a while when goofy stuff went on at work.
That's really funny.
And that's part of and now like after a while I see that I was actually infecting their people who weren't where I was at. I was
Yeah.
and they had to get rid of me because I was the inline workers. You got to have them in line. Don't let some infection
You
come
need
in there and mess with
compliant,
them.
obedient cogs in a machine is what
Yeah,
you need. It's
yeah.
funny, you had circus music. We did memes of the Swedish chef. And it wasn't
Yeah.
our CEO, it was someone else who wanted to be CEO, would come in blustering, being abusive, and say a bunch of literal nonsense. And we nicknamed him the Swedish chef because the whole joke is no one understands what he's saying and it's chaotic. And so that was our little childish, impish version of that. And so, how do you deal with that whole aspect of you're no longer the obedient yes person because now you're awake? That would be my language. I don't know if you would go with
I'd
that, but
use
I
that.
would say you're awake. I'm awake too. I work with a lot of awake people, awakening people, people wanting to be awake.
Mhm.
And it's a hard dance, I would imagine, with sobriety, at least, from my vantage point, because you want to be feral a little. You want to be more like a tiger. You don't want to be a good little boy or girl, but being feral, being wild, there are other risks there, right?
Yeah.
And I'm friends with a lot of anarchists, just in libertarians, truly friends. I
Mm,
go to Anarchapulco in Mexico, and man, they don't like rules. And a
yeah.
lot of them drink all day long. And I've known two that have passed from
Yeah.
liver failure. So they
It'll
were
kill
they
you.
were going hard in the paint. So how do you navigate that middle path of like, I'm awake and I'm going to resist things that I find morally repugnant. And I'm going to demand more of myself and my reality without going full tilt wild
Yeah,
and giving yourself permission to go do that.
that's a good question. I don't know. I know one thing happened to me is I completely unplugged from anything that wasn't serving me.
That's
One of the
brilliant.
first things was the TV. I still have a TV that hangs on the wall, but it hasn't had any service in it in 10 years. I'm like, what am I doing? Should I take that down? But sometimes I'll pipe some Netflix through it and watch a movie or
Oh,
do
yeah.
something like that every once, but rarely. But I'll tell you, that was not a noble thing because when I prior to in June of 2014, I got caught breaking in the house stealing medication. And the judge down in New Albany, Indiana, Judge Cody, told me, and I can almost say it verbatim. He said, sentencing guidelines for the crimes you have committed is 6 to 20 years in the Indiana Department of Corrections. And looking back at it, I'm pretty sure that was just the universe scaring the shit out of me. I don't think I'd ever got that. I don't have a big criminal background. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a habitual felon or nothing like that. But I did end up pleading to the lowest class felony in Indiana. But when that compass needle started coming around, and I was scared. I thought I was trying not to go to prison. That's what I was trying to do. I didn't necessarily want to get sober, but I knew not getting sober was not going to help that cause. And I knew I had
Yeah.
a problem with the dope and the booze. That was apparent. I'd been trying to get sober for 4 years and just wasn't getting any traction with it. Um, but when I did that, they weren't. I'd asked about home incarceration a couple times, and they laughed at me. Like, you don't go from 6 to how about 3 years, Dan? Don't. And my friends had said, don't 3 years, you'll be out in a year and a half. And that still didn't sound any better to me. And when I compass needle turned, they opened their I'll say they opened their hearts to home incarceration all of a sudden, and I don't know why how that happened. I have what's called a miracle list in my telephone. These
Yeah.
things that happen to me in recovery that I have no explanation for other than that they're miracles. The universe, when I got myself aligned, starting the beginning and I was making an effort, all I had to do was start making an effort to get in alignment with the universe. The universe started doing things for my good that were good for me. And so I was getting to this. That ankle bracelet costs $100 a week to wear. And I got sentenced to a year of home
That's a lot of
incarceration.
money.
And I can't turn off or I can't turn off the gas and I can't turn off the electric or stop paying the insurance or the house payment. But what I could do is turn off that $150 cable TV bill. It wasn't enough to pay for it, but somehow or another, I remember the lawyer asked me, he said, are you sure you can afford home incarceration? It's like, I can't not. What I can't afford is the other thing. I will
Yeah.
find a way to do this. And I ended up getting turned loose after 9 months, but I'd taken my spot. That's at the same time I ran in, when your student's ready to teach your peers kind of thing. And had an invite to a guy was trying to get me to come to this particular meeting. And I always think this thing like, this is the way I was. If you brought something to me that was working for you, I instantly reject it just out of hand. I mean, even like, hey, would you like a cup of coffee? No, I'm good. Would you like this warm chocolate chip cookie? No, I'm okay. Uh, would you like to come to this meeting that's really working for me? Nah, I'm busy on Tuesday nights. I wasn't
Yeah.
busy on Tuesday nights, but I finally ended up getting to a point where I went there and I met that guy and I went through the work in for about 4 months. Uh, I could take a guy through the work in about 4 to 6 months, I think is the right timeline, and watch it completely transform somebody's life. And, I got through the work and I still had to wear that ankle bracelet for 5 more months, but they turned me loose at 9 months. They let me off early because the
Yeah.
officers and the corrections people saw that I had changed, that I was not a problem anymore. Um, but checking out of that stuff and actually, because I was too deep in it, and I still stay out of it today. I felt during this last political deal, me getting sucked in again. And I could feel also that just was not good for me. That didn't
Yeah.
felt like I was drinking poison or something. There was something going on with it.
I
So I had
think
to
it literally is that. Yeah.
taking some steps back. In the beginning with that felony thing, I used as an excuse not to vote and all that. And but then somebody corrected me and told me that you can actually vote in Indiana when you're a felon. I was like, I didn't need to know that. Uh, but
Yeah,
somehow I've been gifted with something that filters, and I just don't subject myself, and I exit from things that, and it comes real natural. And sometimes I even avoid them, like that premonition kind of thing.
yeah,
I'll know not to go there. I don't have no
yeah.
business there, even though I should go there, up by some account. But that's I kind of sometimes say this thing has gotten me a little bit bulletproof.
Yeah.
That it takes a lot to rock me, and I don't go sticking my nose in places that might.
Why do you think so many people volunteer to be hurt by things like the
Being
news or
that
things that they know don't serve them that only make them feel bad? What do you think
because
that
that's what they're
is?
used to, right?
All
That's the
right.
comfort. I grew up in a
Yep.
chaotic environment, so the chaos is normal, and I would rather have something I'm used to than something I'm
Yeah.
not used to. I know how I've been navigating that all my life. I'll keep on doing it, even though I'm a mess.
It's interesting because I grew up in a tremendous amount of chaos as well. But I had grandparents intervene, I think, at a really critical developmental phase because I
Mm.
had full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder when I was 4.5, 5 years old, which is really early.
How
Rituals like I
did
had to flick the light switch a
light
certain number of
switch?
times before I went to bed at night. I had to blink my both eyes an equal number of times. I had to chew food for the same amount of time on both sides of my mouth. Like
Wow.
really, yeah, full blown ritual. I call it amulet thinking, right? Every day that I use this red pen, a meteor doesn't hit the earth. So the day I don't use this red pen, the meteor is going to hit the earth. We're all going to die, right? It's
It'll be
it's
my
a
fault.
high anxiety disorder, and it's a child's attempt. It's maladaptive, but to gain control. Like I can control this if I just do this, it's okay. And my grandparents were fantastic human beings. My maternal grandparents took me to see a cognitive behavioral therapist, and a lot of that is logic and thought exercises, and not denying fear, but like working through it. Like, okay, worst case scenario, what does that actually look like? And what options do I have there, or this or that? But I have a different problem now. I'm not comfortable in chaos. I am triggered by even the slightest amount of chaos. Like I joke, my life's a weird little Zen garden. You know those rock gardens with the sand?
Hmm.
I have convinced myself, and I realized the futility of this as COVID hit, that I could control what came in. And as long as, because I'd spent, even as an adult, tens of thousands of dollars on therapy, I was like, I'm not going to have a midlife crisis. I'm not going to have a breakdown. I'm not going to lose it all. I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to do this work. And I did it. I really like closed a lot of loops. I'm not perfect, but I did a lot of work. And then the world went insane. And I don't mean just the disease and the anxiety I mean human behavior the last few years, like the lady
Yeah.
around the corner, that's not a one off. This is quite common. And it's not just me experiencing it. When you're in a safe space, we'll talk about it. Like, who's trying to cancel you this week? What's going on with you? Who's giving you a hard time? Who told you they're going to ruin your business because they got spare time or whatever? And it at first felt like a flood where I was like, so let me get this straight. I literally 1 year of my life went into debt to like heal from childhood trauma so that I didn't perpetuate these issues. And now the whole world has become my parents, and which is not true.
Yeah.
It's an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so I have the opposite problem where I'm so hyper reactive. Like
Mm.
the spiritual white blood cells attack the tissue.
Mm.
And that can become its own problem. You can really constrict and restrict and become very myopic, and your world can get very small very quickly if you're not careful. So I'm always looking for suggestions and options and
Yeah.
tools to find that middle path at all
Yeah.
times.
Well, I see some people too, and it's kind of liken it to like the adrenaline kind of addiction, like gambling. That's that thrill of
Yeah.
that risk behavior kind of thing that you just
Ugh.
really like. I can't gamble. I've never been able to do that. I can sit there and shoot pool pretty decent, and we put $1 on the table, and I melt. I fall apart. I
I
can't.
watched 10 minutes of a movie about gambling addiction with Adam Sandler in it. It's actually very good. I have never been able to finish it. It's called Uncut Gems. And
I've
it's
heard of
about
that.
him chasing the dragon, trying to
Yeah.
handle a gambling debt the whole movie. And I lasted 10 minutes and I thought my heart was going to explode. So I'm very
Yeah.
sensitive. to that
So I wonder if there's
stuff.
like maybe something similar to like that chaos too, that
Yeah,
you almost you subconsciously desire that in your life for some white reason. I don't like it makes you feel like you're living with that
yeah,
wildness, and I choose not. I just spent my Thanksgiving. I went down. I've got a cabin in the woods in southern Indiana. It's
awesome.
buried in the Hoosier National Forestry. We don't have cell service. We don't have electricity. We don't have water. We got wood stove, and I just go down there. I like it like a. I'm a handyman now, and the battery charger. That you got every night. I come home.
Hmm.
I got to take all my batteries and put them in the charger. Places like a big battery charger for me, and I have to put myself in there, and I really enjoy the solitude of it too. I went down there by myself and spent from Wednesday night, and I come home this morning. That
Yeah,
I just and it's just I have worked 7 days in November. I took 2 weeks, completely checked out of the earth, and went down and stayed at the cabin for 2 weeks. I did come home for my men's meeting and my
yeah,
AA meeting, and also take a shot, coordinate that with taking a shower. Uh,
yeah,
but and then I went all through Thanksgiving that whole weekend too. So I've like been down there like the entire month. I pretend to deer hunt. Uh, I don't. I
fantastic.
haven't killed anything in 25 years, but uh, there's something about it, and
Yeah,
ultimately I'm just hiking with hunting clothes on, or go sit up in a tree. I used to tell people now that I listen to audiobooks now, and I'll have one earbud in. I can still hear, but I'll have one
hmm,
earbud in listening to a book or something. But you say it just looks like I'm hunting. I got camouflage on, I got a bow, and I'm 25 foot up in a tree, but
yeah.
all I'm doing is reading a book. Uh,
And I
so
love
I
that
used to
you go
actually do that.
bow hunting in quotes, because there's something about that. Yeah, there's something about nature, and I think my thing is I thought I could make my life be the cabin for you. I thought I could make my whole life the battery charger. So that's my little delusion
Yeah, I
that
don't
I'm.
know if that's possible
It's not. It's very
because
delusional. Yeah,
yeah, that has to be special to me. And if I was there, because I've thought
yeah.
about that, and I thought about, can I get myself in a position where I would just move down there and live like no electric and no nothing, and cut my firewood, and maybe I'd start killing stuff to eat it. I don't have any opposition to
Hmm.
it. Just frankly, I don't want to do the work it takes after you shoot something.
Oh, yeah, it's a lot of
There's,
work. I've been hunting many, many times and field dressing a deer and carrying a deer, and all of it is like, can we just go to the grocery store? Like,
yeah, yeah. And when I
yeah.
was younger, I did, I did quite a bit of deer killing, but I hit a point, and it was prior to my sobriety. I was still drinking and using, but I just lost that. I'd have one right there, and I just didn't want to do it, so I didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've kind of the big book also has a line, and I'm gonna beat it to death. It's just because that's my frame of reference of a thing in there. It talks about being safe and protected and placed in a place of neutrality. And I really do. It's kind of like sometimes it's like the bullet shooting scenes in the Matrix is what it kind of feels like. It's like you're not even having hardly move, but you that didn't miss me. Oh, that didn't miss me. And I see these things that like could have been something, but somehow or another I was protected from it. Um,
I want to get
it's a
into the
fun thing.
Matrix. The
You
last
know,
couple of years have felt like John Wick. So not missing the bullets as much. And
oh,
yeah, I that's really admirable. And for
but
you
I'd
doing
like.
this podcast, what's one of your favorite spiritual things that you've learned? Have you taken anything anybody's talked about and incorporated it into your
Oh
life?
yeah. Every time
Yeah,
I don't think I do a podcast without that happening, but I don't really like bookmark stuff necessarily. Once in a while, something will come along, but I almost feel like I envelop it to it's mine, and I
yeah,
lose the reference of where I got it from. I had a teacher in early recovery that tried to teach me a lot, and I wasn't ready. And there's some things. One night we was at the. I always talk, and I see my guys like somebody asked me to sponsor them, and they
yeah.
come to me for help, and then you start trying to give them the help, and they got their shield and their sword up, blocking and parrying. They won't let you help them. They come and ask for it. My sponsor working in a treatment center. Uh, Thus deals with that on the day to day. But I was blocking and parrying with this guy that night, and he got tired of it. And I think it was like 2 a.m. and a Dairy Queen. I'd have been tired of my shit too. And I do get, but he said he he stuck his finger in my face and he said, "The thing is, Dan, you must participate in your own recovery." And that sounds very, very simple. And it technically is, but it's still like a mantra for me. And I teach other people too that, you don't get to just sit around and be in a state of recovery. There's work that needs to be done. There's things. And then after a while, it doesn't feel like work anymore. You have to actually implement those
Yeah.
habits and stuff into your life. And then after a while, what's just happened is like, that's the dude I am today. There's a veil between me and the old me. And I really have to work hard to peek beyond those curtains today to get back to the old me. I feel so different. I feel so different that my high school buddies stopped recognizing me at the Kroger's and stuff. I'd have to remind them who I was. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking that there's the Christian thought of rebirth. The 12 step says about that we were in step 3. It says after we've made this decision in step 3 that we were reborn. And had a podcast guest that took on one of those names like Ram Dass and, those how
Yeah.
they changed their names. And when she was talking to me, that made sense to me. That was almost the same thing. I've changed so much that it's not fair to call me Dan Reeves anymore, you know?
Right.
And I think that's part of what's happened with these people. And this guest also had that big, huge transformation of overcoming some trauma and some
Yeah.
severe trauma, so much so that she was led to change her first and last name as a
That's
result of it to
fantastic.
begin again. And
When
like
you
in her,
said that you have to participate in your own recovery, it made me think of something because I use a lot of heuristics and like profundities I do spiritual transformation coaching. So I find myself saying the same 5 sentences a lot because they're true, right? And there's something in
they
them. But
work.
yes, and one of them is the map is not the territory.
I like
Because
that.
when I do work, I have to remind them I'm not your concierge or your administrative assistant. Spiritually, I'm your coach, which means I can't run the plays. We
Yeah.
can do them in practice. We can talk about them. I can show you film, but I can't go out on that field. That's going to be you. And it's
Yep.
utterly different from theory, like spiritual theory, all these concepts, these sort of nebulous ideas. When you're in it, it's a totally different universe. And
I like that.
remembering that, and that in shamanism in particular, it's like you're not alone, but with your spiritual experiences, you kind of are, because no one else is having that in your mind with you at the exact same time. It's you have to decide that that's profound for you, and
Yeah.
only you can synthesize it and figure it out. And no one, you can't outsource that to anyone, let alone me. I'm the last person, because I would just go, I don't know, did you Google it? Like, I'm the least
Yeah.
comfortable with authority, I think, of any spiritual practitioner that I've met, where I just constantly want to democratize and get the client to self serve as much as possible, which I'm sure is very annoying,
Yeah.
but it's the
Well,
only way to do it.
as long as we've been it's the oldest spiritual teachings available, we'll boil it down to it's an inside job. You got to do it on you. There's,
Yes.
that goes back as before, what I think that comes from Buddha, as long as, and that wasn't even written. Like his stuff was passed on verbally for years and then
Yeah.
written way after the fact. So, yeah. And, there's
Yeah.
something about, it seems to me, and it might be I'm biased, and you probably have the same kind of bias because the people you see have the same kind of. So it looks like everybody's sick, right? It looks like everybody's. And when I say sick, I mean that in very dear terms. That's the
Yeah.
big book says we are spiritually sick, and that's ultimately why we're drinking. We're not drinking because of I like the taste of alcohol or I like the taste of booze. I'm doing it because my spirit is ill, and that's the only
Yeah.
way it knows how to. It's kind of a disassociation thing to some extent. I get loaded and I don't have to think about my problems till tomorrow
Yeah.
morning when I got one more problem, a hangover, adding to it. But I lost my train.
Well, one thing that jumped out at me when you mentioned the Bible, because I love the Bible, which always shocks people. I was raised
I do
Catholic. I went
too.
to Catholic school. I went to a Catholic university. My issue is not the Bible. My issue is with organized religion and
Me
hierarchy
too.
and judgment and all that, and also hypocrisy. I just can't. if you take care of your own house before you tell me how to live, kind of a thing with the Catholic Church. I think everybody knows what I'm referring to on that. But one thing that's come back for me that I've been writing about as well, that comes from the Bible, is the Ten Commandments. I think they're the way they're taught in Sunday school and stuff. I think is a horrible spiritual crime because they're actually deep. But when you're a kid, the one about you shall have no other God but me, this concept of idolatry, right, is like God's jealous. That never made sense to me because he's God. Even as a kid, I was like, it's not fitting at all. And the older I get, the more I realize what that was about, which was putting power into things outside of us and worshiping them, such as maybe, you may not have thought of this when you were drinking, but I think some people worship partying. I think
Yeah.
they worship drinking. There's an idolatry that goes with that, or consumption
Hmm.
culture, like buying things, producing
Hmm.
things, or, even in the spiritual community, there's a lot of people who say, I'm so and so, I'm this reincarnated, and you're to address me this way. And they wear the white, pashmina and the whole affectatious bullshit, pardon my French. But it's a form of blasphemy and idolatry, not because God's jealous, but because it's bad for you. It's
Yeah.
a cause of disease. And, I remember seeing an interview. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a podcast called Real Ones with John Bernthal and Sheila Booth. It's real
Yeah.
good.
I've seen some of them. I've seen some. I think I've seen, is that one podcast with those two? So is what you're
Yes.
referring to?
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that particular one.
And I was stunned because I was like, wait a minute, am I a fan of Sheila Booth? And I cried like a baby, and I am not a crier. And he said something that I've never heard from a man in my life. And my father was very violent, and he said, and I was all worried about these details, and this part's true and this part's not true, because, one of his ex-girlfriends is suing him, and it involves domestic violence. And he said, and then I realized, because he was getting sober, and I believe Josh Brolin was one of his early sponsors that told him to get over himself, kind of a thing, which was very funny, that story. And he said, but it doesn't matter because I put hands on her. So the details of it don't matter. And it was an incredibly cathartic moment for me. I had a real watershed because I'd never heard a man in my life who hit women just say it. And he had an active lawsuit. His lawyer's probably having a heart attack somewhere.
Shut up.
Yeah, shut up, lie, pretend, don't talk. And he knew, but he knew that's where his disease came from, was that stuff. And he talked about it with tremendous clarity. And I was blown away by his discovery of hardcore traditionalist Catholicism.
Mm.
And it hit me like, that's good for him. He should be a traditionalist Catholic. He should go to a Latin mass every day. It's good for him. It's really, there's something about it it fits him, it suits him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And part of it he talked about was this concept of idolizing the self, like in a
That's
bad
big in
way.
AA.
Yeah, and
That's
getting in his
yeah.
own head about, like, I'm an artist, I'm this. And it really resonated with a lot of shamanism, which involves a lot of ego death, whether we use psychedelics
Mm.
or not. It's about being dismembered and put back together and
Yeah.
realizing you're not in charge of anything. This isn't about you. You're not that special. You're just here to wonder and participate and take part in your role in this magical kind of tapestry. The minute you get outside of that and you start running game on it, you're doing something wrong. And yeah, I remember being so blown away by that interview. And I actually sent a hard copy letter to his agent. And I said, I don't ever need to hear from him or anything. But if you ever pass him his mail, I don't even know if you're his agent anymore after all that, by the way, too, that scandal and everything else. Let him know that like mattered. It just really did. And also the idea of like people like me, there's people who are shamans or whatever who judge Catholics. And anytime you take a group as a whole, you're missing the point. I have
Yeah.
a really good friend who's an exorcist and demonologist, and he's a traditionalist Catholic. His name is Ralph Sarchi. They made a movie about him. He's played by Eric
Mm.
Bana, which he loves, by the way, because Eric Bana is quite handsome. And so is
Yeah.
Ralph, to be fair. And he's a retired New York City police sergeant and stuff. He's got a rough demeanor, but it suits him. He's fine. And he's not hurting anybody. And he knows everything I do for a living. He's very against tarot cards. He doesn't like any of this. It's a big problem for him. And he's only ever treated me with respect because the first rule is judge not, lest ye
Yeah.
be judged. So he just minds his own business. I mean, he screams on Facebook all the time, which I love. I sign up for his Zoom classes because it's like apocalyptic Bible study with a dose of MAGA. He has like angry gym teacher energy, which I like. I trust
Uh,
it somehow.
Huh.
And my clients join and they're like, this is wild. I'm like, this guy's great. And I always learn something, but I can learn from Catholics. I can learn from anybody. And
That
I think that's the beauty of shamanism.
that same guy. This guy's name is Happy. It's not really his name is William, but he's known
Yeah.
by Happy. And it was from a little being a little like his little from a time he was a little kid. But he had said something one time, and he said, "I just draw from all spiritual teachings. I can draw from all that." And that was a
Yeah.
problem I had as a kid. There was things going on in church, and I never was made to go to church. My mom and dad didn't go to church, but every once in a while. But I had grandparents that did, and I had some interest in it, because I think
Yeah.
another line out of the big book, it says inside every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God, some kind of
Yeah.
spirit. You may not like, it's written in 1935, and that's the only thing that he talked about was God back then, right? But he had the foresight to continually talk about that you get to have a God of your own understanding, higher power, spirit of the
Yeah.
universe. You get to you really get to make it up within certain reasons. I don't think you can make one up that says it's okay to kill people. There are some lines in there that you
Yep.
got to stay in between the lanes on. But Happy had said that when I was a kid, I was going to church and there was just messages that I wasn't understanding, wasn't mature enough to ask for any kind of
Yeah.
clarification to say, hey, what did that mean? But I was hearing conflicting stuff like you was talking about, like the jealous stuff
Yeah.
uh, and instead of doing any further looking into it, I just had the ability just to cut it all off. And I also knew because I was into Baptist, and I've been to most of my family was Catholic, and mom's family was Methodist, and you was getting these different boxes that people were in, and I thought that you had to completely go with whatever box you chose, right?
Right.
Yeah, and there was boxes that were telling me different things. So which one of these is right? Well, pick the wrong one. So instead of doing the work to do any further exploration, and of course I was just a little kid for the most part, I just wrote it all off. So when I got to
Me
A,
too.
I didn't really have any blocks to religion. I wasn't like anti. I was really the just probably baseline agnostic. Just didn't give it any thought. That allowed me to, again, my sponsor somehow did this miracle where he led me into this relationship or reliance. I like reliance better because I don't know that I really have a relationship, but I definitely rely on this power in my life. Um, and I've learned that I can actually harness it, and I can actually uh, you know manifest things within
Yeah.
reason. And I haven't been able to manifest that lottery ticket, but I really haven't tried. um,
That's really funny.
but he
And
he he led me into this relationship, this dependence upon this power, and
yeah,
but never put his on me. I like down the pipe, and I was like, I don't have any idea what my sponsor believes because he didn't need. That's what he was in the business of doing. He was in the business
it's
of
funny because
helping me
clients
get to
ask
mine.
me regularly what I believe or what I think's about to happen or what I think about this. And I generally don't say it unless we're in a long-term kind of coaching relationship and with a lot of footnotes and a lot of asterisks of like, this is my thing, this is not your thing. I don't get into it because it really can interfere with someone else's development. So he did you a solid service.
It was
And
beautiful, and I try to emulate that today in my sponsor.
Yeah,
I want to do that same thing.
it takes a lot of, I think, personal discipline to not get put yourself in the story, right? And I do that in other areas
Yes.
of my life. Trust me, ask my husband. Poor thing. He's probably banked several years of just, early retirement with the stuff he has to deal with me. But yeah, another client, because in shamanism, we get into a lot of like resolving generational trauma, inherited
Tell me a little
trauma.
more about that shamanism
Yeah.
and what it is, but go ahead.
Well, so I'm a Native American shaman. I'm part Native American. I'm Sioux and Cherokee. So that's sort
I
of the
kind of saw
tradition, but
that.
yeah, it's where all the color comes from. Someone once said to me in Chicago, she goes, "You don't look Native American." I was like, "Why? Because I'm not in a costume. Are you kidding me? You think I got this from the Irish or the German side of the family?" I'm about as brown as they get. It is December here. So there are shades darker than this that come. in the spring, trust me. But it's very cross-cultural. And the way that I teach or coach or mentor is literally as agnostic as you can get. Because when you look at it, shamanism is really just a set of methodologies or structures that get you to question the nature of your reality and open yourself to the possibility that there is what we would call a spiritual world that exists that has influence on us, either positive or negative. And you know, we can explore that in any way people want to. But trauma is a big part of it because a lot of people, when they approach a shaman, they want to heal from something. They want energy healing. They want to. I don't do plant medicine with people because I'm afraid of the DEA. I have clients who work for the DEA. They're very serious. They all used to work for the CIA, like for real. So they're not the back of the bench team members. So just so everybody knows, the DEA is serious about stuff, and I don't want to risk my business doing that. But this is a theme, and my newest sort of resource that I try and share with people is not Native American or anything. It's from the Old Testament. It's Exodus with Moses.
Mm.
Because I reread, you know, in Hebrew parts of the Bible or the Kabbalah or, you know, other things like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I'm an equal opportunity explorer. And what struck me in rereading Exodus, and I don't know what called me to it, honestly, I was just drawn to Moses as an archetype. I wanted to read it, was they get out of slavery in Egypt. It was pretty tough. There were 7 plagues, you know, angels, lamb's blood over doors, pretty dramatic situation. They get out of Egypt, out of bondage and out of slavery. And for 4 generations, the Israelites continue to try to enslave themselves and get themselves back into bondage. And at the beginning of it, when Moses is alive, he's just beside himself. He's trying to get home. He has a wife, an Ethiopian wife, who I understand was kind of hot. And he had goats and stuff. And he didn't want to do this forever. And he had already done this huge thing. And he was like, go be free now. And just kept watching them make it hard and self-destruct or, you know, create idols, right? The golden calf and do these things. And what was interesting is they say it takes 4 generations for the trauma to leave, the trauma of slavery or bondage or hardship or really being dehumanized, I would say. And so when people are like, well, why aren't I healing faster? And where, you know, I'm doing all the things, I'm taking the tinctures, I'm doing Reiki or yoga or whatever it is. And it's like, bro, even Moses was like, it's going to take 4 generations. And Yahweh was there, son. He was up in a mountain and he was like, it's going to take 4 generations. Not that you should give up hope, but like this idea of having some modesty in it and just for your own sanity. Like you're not going to push an easy button and all your trauma goes away. And not that you should ruminate on it either. You shouldn't, you know, my friend Roger said something that his healer said to him, his teacher trainer, because he's an energy worker, which is you keep licking those wounds, you're going to start to like the taste of them. So
That's a
finding
very
that
good
middle
line.
path, it's an awesome line. Not mine at all. I'm an equal opportunity thief.
Yeah,
So
me
when
too. I'm
something's
not
good,
bringing it. I won't claim to be bringing anything new to the
yeah.
table. I've learned
But
from my teachers.
it's so how are we, you know, maybe it's a stoic thing. I don't know. How are we joyful in our burdens? Understanding that we still, part of that burden is going to be inherited trauma, childhood trauma, trauma of living in the world, of maybe accidentally seeing the news or something. How do we find joy in our toil, in our labor? And, you know, I don't know that anything does that better than Exodus, frankly, you know?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that, well, I have some friends, some sponsees that have went through the work and got sober, entered into us because there's a difference between what we call being in recovery, being in a recovered state, and being sober. Being
Yeah.
sober don't, so being sober doesn't work for us. That's what people go, would you just take a drink? Because we're worse than dry. Uh, but I like watching these guys that since have had children. One of the other things that I've noticed is that majority of the guys that have come to me are guys who have had either absent or shitty dads, you know, and then I end up filling this kind of role in that sense, not anything on purpose. I just noticed it's like, hey man, like all these guys have had problems there.
Yeah.
But then I watch them have kids and I love watching them raise their kids in a completely different way. And it's some of that, you know, I know there's some stuff that they talk about like a generational trauma that is not like like evidence based, whereas, that you're still carrying on the legacy, even though you're not doing anything bad, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
We're,
do. Yeah.
we're almost like a, uh, lost a word, like being,
There's a guy, he's a doctor, Gabor Mate, wrote a
yep,
book about this called The Myth
yeah,
of Normal. And it's one of
yeah,
the best books you could read on this topic.
yeah,
And
it is
he
great.
had a big personal breakthrough going to do ayahuasca. The shamans took him aside
Mm.
and said, "You can't be with the rest of the group. Like your vibe's off, man." And he's like, "I'm the doctor. These are my patients." And they're like, "That's adorable. We don't care." Which is a very, shamans don't see titles, they don't see money, and no one is better than anybody else ever. We're just doing the work kind of a thing. And I think that that book is a masterpiece because of that. And your client, your listen to your clients, your mentees are breaking that
Funsies
cycle.
is what we call them. Yeah.
Yeah. They're doing that's the hardest work, is the breaking of that cycle intentionally, and, having the discipline to go a different route. That's a full-time job for everybody, sober, not, whatever the thing is. It's a full-time job.
Yeah. We have another line that says we don't we don't regret the past, but we don't shut the door on it either. Is what the line says. And
Yeah.
some of the things of that's still lingering is the mistakes I made as a father. And even being sober, who knows if I'd still made those mistakes, right?
Right.
Was it as an alcoholic or not? I wasn't a monster. I didn't beat my kids or do stuff, but I sure as hell could have been a whole lot better. And that stuff just takes you out of presence. You just can't
Yeah.
be, alcoholics just can't be present in somebody else's life. It's just impossible. Addicts, that you said something about, we call it the bondage of self. I am just too self-consumed, self-centered, selfish, just the only thing I care about. And I will tell you, I'll come over and help you move your couch and think I'm not selfish. But inside there was that I was bonded to myself, and I wasn't able to. I wish I could do it over again. But what I get to do is watch these guys I'm working with get to do it over
Yep.
again, and I get to kind of vicariously a little bit. One of them, I'm the godfather of one of my sponsee's
That's
sons,
awesome.
and he's a little 3 year old guy, and he calls me Unca Dan, and he talks about me when I'm gone, and he's just 3 years old. And when I leave, when I've been over there, he will talk about it after I leave. And I'm glad Uncle Dan come today, and things like that. It
Yeah.
really touches my heart more than anything else. And that's I've always said, and I say this. I worry about saying the same, like you said. You got 5 things you say, on the podcast. There's at least I'm consistent.
Yeah.
That it was cool that I got fixed when I was 45 years old. That's when I got sober. It was cool that I got fixed at that age. The trick is how not to break them,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that's possible. There's a piece of me, like the hero's journey thing with Joseph Campbell, about,
Yeah.
maybe life is going through hard stuff, and our job is to recover from that, and then teach other people how to recover from the same things that we did. Maybe that's just what we're doing, and this. There's no escaping the trauma. And I wonder about that, about people. Are there people out there actually? And I'm sure there are, but I'm questioning that. Are there people out there that actually get to have these little lives where everything is good, and they don't end up having things to, they don't end
No,
up having stuff go on? I don't think so
of
either.
course not. No. And yeah, it's one of the unfortunate side effects, I think, of social media. And to your point, the TV was the proto social media, which is people really only present the thing they want you to see, right? Perfect life, perfect hair, perfect vacation, perfect car, whatever it is. And it's a
Yeah.
lie. It's all a lie. And because I have to use social media for my business, I stayed off of it till very recently. But I published tarot decks. I have a fiduciary responsibility in my own business to be present and post, right? But my rule with myself is I post and I ghost. So if you send me a message on there, I'm unreliable. I may not ever respond to you. It's not because I don't care. I just can't be on it because it makes me feel physically sick. And I think that's because it's a lie. And a lot of people who do what I do will sell what I call hopium. where they go,
Hmm.
you don't ever have to have a problem again. Oh, you just fix this, whatever. And then you come to me, and I have a much harder time as a salesperson for my business because I go, oh no, I can't. Life is up and down. You're going to be unhappy. Bad things are going to happen. Trouble finds you. There will be suffering. And one day you will literally die. Like that's going to happen. And you don't know how or
Sure, loved
when.
ones will die.
Yes. And so I'm not going to tell you lies and I'm not going to give you false hope and I'm not going to give you a false sense of control over this thing that we're all literally just trying to get our arms around every day. And yeah, those people who do that, they're it's like a kind of grift. They're really con men and women, and it seems to be dissipating. And it gives me hope in humanity. I think people are getting better discernment and judgment with that, and they're not going for the easy button as much as they were even a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
have
you're right.
hope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I kind of have cultivated a lot of my, because I have personal social media and then I have stuff for the podcast and for my
yeah,
handyman woodworking business and that kind of stuff. And those things I'm posting and ghosting on for the most part. I don't hang out in my DTM woodwork uh, Instagram page. I just don't. Um,
yeah,
but like my personal pages, from if I get too much of that out of you, you're gone. I don't
yeah,
care. It
yeah,
doesn't matter. It's not like you're going to be a client or you're going to do anything, and even if you are, we don't want you because there's people that I walk up to the door and I'm going to go up. I'm going to do this job I committed to doing today. But sometimes it's on the phone. I know that this person is not my client. They just
yeah.
aren't. And just, and, uh, I think it's okay to lie
Well,
and
I
tell
think
them that I got
that's
something else to do or I'm busy for a month or two
yeah.
months or do something just to snake it. So, because I can feel that I don't want to be there. I don't want that. If I had a
That I
bad
think is a
experience,
perfect example of emotional sobriety. Is going, I'm feeling something and I'm saying no to this. I'm going to
yeah,
be really present and not do this. Yeah.
I had a job where I went over and I really liked the gal who was talking to me and I really wanted the job. And when I got there, the husband was a complete D-head. And
Yeah.
I wanted to leave so bad. I didn't even want to hang around to talk about it. The energy was just like out face, out of here. But I stood through it, and then she called and talked to me about it. And for whatever reason,
Yeah.
I told her the truth. I said, you know what? I'd like to do the job, but that dude can't be there while I'm there.
Wow.
And she started crying, and then she started leaning into me about how she felt the same way, but couldn't. You know, she didn't want him there either. They're divorced now. Uh, and she very soon after that, and I went and did the job. And she said, "I'll make him, I'll make sure he's not around." And but that was funny because I was like, "Boy," but I was being really drawn to tell her the truth about why I didn't want to go over and work for her. I wanted to work for her, but I went out on that ledge and ended up being uh, one of those. I'm sure it happens to you. I mean, when I'm
Oh,
working
yeah.
with guys, there'll be stuff that comes out of my mouth that I don't know where it came from.
I
You
was
know,
going to say, you might be a shaman. I got good news and I
uh,
got bad news. You might be one of those people. Yep.
Yeah. Being a
Doing that
good
work.
12,
So thank
being,
you.
a- being a good 12-step sponsor probably is a lot in alignment with
Yeah.
shaman type of stuff, you got to really, there's some about, I always talk about like at some level, I have a thermometer in all those guys' mouths. So I can like take their temperature at
Yeah.
any given moment, and I feel them. And because we have relationships with one another, I know when they're off. When
Hmm.
I'm off too. Like when I said, my friends had told me, "Hey, man, something is wrong with you, brother.
Yeah.
Uh, have you been drinking? Are you using?" I was like, "No, man, I am not." But they were able to come to me and they felt it. So that is so. How about the skeptical shaman? How's that? Tell me
Yeah.
the background
The
under that.
podcast. So I picked that name on purpose because I know it sounds like a contradiction. People always have a reaction to it like, no, that doesn't make sense. But it does because skepticism to me is the other side of the coin of curiosity. You don't ask questions or challenge paradigms either for yourself or others unless you're curious, unless you're noticing something and you're going, that thing in the Ten Commandments, I don't think that's what that meant. That's skepticism is, and I think our culture considers skepticism synonymous with pessimism or cynicism. And
Yeah.
it's not pessimistic or cynical at all. It's just skeptical and like, why or how does that work? And showing people that you can be spiritual and logical, intuitive and have good discernment, good judgment, and trust yourself in situations to go, I'm a little uncomfortable, to your point. I don't want to do that, or something about this yoga teacher doesn't ring true for me. And that's really what we explore in the podcast is people that are kind of either, just everyday humans exploring spirituality and how they manage that with a normal life, raising kids, going to work, whatever it is. Or, a lot of the interviews have been cult survivors, people who've really overcome something. And I find their point of view really interesting, just like I find yours, because there's a radical honesty and they got by something. And so they're very quick to call BS on themselves and other things. And I like that. They're skeptical, you know.
I get it.
One of them reached out. She's been on my podcast several times. She's a friend of mine. Shout out to Abigail. I'll have Abigail listen to this. She'll love it. She's sober, by the way. And so I think she'd really appreciate this on 20 levels. But she was in Scientology and she didn't really know she was in Scientology for a while. She just thought she had an acting coach in Hollywood. It's this whole shell
Wow.
game, right? Nobody joins a cult either. They join a good thing and then 15 years later they go, what the hell happened? Right. And she came to me to do coaching work. And it was right after she got out of Scientology. And, they financially just ruin you. That's a part of it, is free labor
Mm,
and all this stuff. And I said, you do not need someone else in your head right now. Go do your own stuff for a while. And you're going to come back and do this work with me. She called me like a year later and she's like, yep, let's go. I was like, let's go. And we just had the best time ever working together. And she's a good example to me of someone who went through hell, believing in something, maybe outsourcing some of her thinking or giving some of her power away for a moment in time, who trusts herself to explore still. To me, that's real bravery, because the way I'm wired, and I think I've painted that picture pretty specifically for you today, is if something burns me, I'm very reticent to continue to explore it or look. I have a hard time trusting myself. I get very concerned, because I didn't have parents really looking out for me, making sure I was safe. So I don't know how to do that. Right. And so they buoy me. I mean, the podcast is really me having conversations with people that I want to have, that enrich me, things I'm curious
yeah.
about, things I'm working on. And so that's the mission of it. That's what we're trying to do. And I'm really excited that tomorrow I get to interview a literal hero of mine, Mark
Yeah.
Vicente,
Very
who
cool.
helped blow the lid on that guy. So
Yeah.
it gives you these wonderful opportunities to talk to people that inspire you.
Yeah. Yeah. I had,
Yeah.
there's speaker tapes. There's out now in the world, 12-step recovery
Yeah.
speaker tapes, and there's sites that have hundreds and thousands of these tapes of somebody telling their story. And there's a guy named Scott Lee who I fell in love with listening to him. It just resonated. Everything that he talked about resonated with me. And then I run into my sponsor, and he's a Scott Lee fan too. I'd already become a Scott Lee fan back trying, and I had the opportunity to have him on my podcast one day, man. And it was so uh, I don't even know to have, I'm real a hero, maybe. I want to say idol, but and I quote
Yeah.
Scott Lee all the time. I mean, I quote him all. I won't let my sponsees listen to him until we're done with the work because I don't want the cat out of the bag. uh,
I love it. You don't
and
want to give up the magic trick because
Yep,
everybody's enjoying the magic show. Yeah.
yep. And then I got to have him on the podcast, and it just was just unbelievable. I love that so much. I go back and listen to it even now. Because
Yeah.
he said, "What do you want to do?" And he wanted to go through the big book and talk about some stuff people misunderstand. And it's kind of like the Exodus thing, right? And
It is.
because
Yeah.
we almost carry that book almost like a Bible. They look like Bibles. They're blue covered books and they're about that thick. Uh,
I think it's a little more functional and
yeah, it is.
pragmatic.
It is. It
And
is. But I mean,
yeah.
the kind of the divine nature of it and the way we
Yeah.
think about it, it does have straight up tools in it. But like it's a 300 something page book, but the 164 pages is all that's the big book. That's the
Yeah.
actual instructions. All the rest of the back end of it is those stories. that these personal stories where people tell their little 12-step gig. Uh,
I flipped through one once. And if you're open to it, I'd love to have you on my podcast.
sure.
And if one thing I would want to talk about is the play. Is that in that book?
Like, is,
It's there's a chapter in AA book that I got my little paws on called The Play. And it's
hmm,
have you seen this?
I have not. Is it one of
It
the
might be a
stories in the
different
back?
resource. It might
Yeah.
be, and it's about how, you think you're doing things differently, but it's really the same play, the same script, the same characters. It's just different people playing the roles. And you
Hmm.
recreate the play over and over again. I might be conflating it
It
with
could be
AA
back in the
stuff.
thing. There is some stuff in there where it talks about Shakespeare and that thing about all the worlds of
Yeah,
the
it's
stage,
probably
and
that.
then
Yep.
uh, so
And
there's a piece of a chapter that goes into depth on that. And uses that analogy that we're out here trying to direct everything. And
yeah,
uh,
I read it and realized that everyone I had ever been in a romantic relationship with was a narcissist. Every
mm,
single one of them. And it was the same play. And the irony is, I read it in someone's who I was dating's home who had just fallen off the wagon. He had an alcohol and cocaine problem. And so I was snooping,
yeah,
actually, which is
yeah.
not
What
a very
what is
nice
in
thing
this
to
thing?
admit to. And read that and I was like, well, Jesus, I'm the problem a little bit. And the real irony of that is I think people who are in relationships with narcissists and a lot of sensitive, intuitive people are. Like if you're a little psychic or you're very vulnerable to that
Mm,
in a way that I'm not sure other people are. And what occurred to me was I was actually kind of a monster because somewhere subconsciously I knew if I dated a narcissist, I would always have the moral high ground. No matter what, no matter what I did, I would always be a better person.
it's
And
weird.
looking at that without the rose colored glasses on and really facing that, it was a big moment for me in my own healing. I think taking accountability for that. You don't intentionally set out to do that. Nobody does,
No, no, no.
but you manage it
Yeah,
nonetheless, which is sort of amazing. Yeah.
yeah. But a lot of people kick themselves around for being a drug addict or alcoholic, and are on that. Christopher has written the 12 steps. So Christopher's my sponsor. He's been sober for 40 years, and he's cherry picked because it's not concrete in that book. Almost to some level, if you picked up that
Mm-hmm.
book by yourself, you would not be able to work the 12 steps. You wouldn't be able to. They're not in there like that. You have to have a guide, a mentor to help you interpret it in order for it to be understandable. Which is, I don't know how you could write a book like that on purpose. That's not a divine thing. How could you write a book that required a guide to understand it at that level? Because there's a few things in there. It says this is step, but it never says anything about step one and step two, really. Nothing like what do you do? Uh, and so Christopher cherry picked from his teachers over the years. He's had a lot of sponsors, and he's picked like all these little twists and turns in it.
Yeah.
And that's what we call, I will call my recipe. I have a recipe. I don't veer from my recipe. I
Yeah.
might little bit, it's not hard lined, but we're going to follow the recipe because I've sponsored 30 something guys in the last 10 years and watch this recipe work in every one of them. And it worked in me. And if you will
Yeah.
do it, I can 100% guarantee you that you'll never have to drink again. That this will work 100%. I can guarantee you, but you got to do it, because that's the other thing. People will
Yeah.
not sponsor people and then relapse. And then they say, well, I worked the steps. No, you didn't. You weren't sponsoring people.
Yeah.
We have a prayer meditation kind of thing. I think if you're not doing some level of some kind of connection through a prayer meditation regimen,
Yeah.
you're not working the steps. So he did that, and we a few years ago, heck, it's been 5 years ago, we started groups here in Louisville, Kentucky for 12 steps for everybody. You didn't have to be alcoholic or addict. If you just want to, if some, what I like to say was, um, and he put it in, he wrote a book about it, and he's actually now editing it down. It was quite a book, and people were intimidated by the size of it. So he's culling it down,
Yeah.
some of the personal stories out of it. But life shouldn't be like this. There's got to be more to life than this. That who doesn't have that at some point going on
Yeah.
that, my life should not be like this. And so we started doing it and we watched it work in what we call, when we were in the rooms, the people who don't drink are called normal people. The normal
It's
people.
very funny. Yeah.
And and I watched it work. And it also gave me some time. We generally don't sponsor cross gender.
Hmm.
There's some exceptions in here and there, maybe a gay guy and a straight guy
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But uh, there was no females that come into the meeting that had the tools that were using our recipe. So we had to start help. These gals are sitting there saying, "Help me, help me."
Yeah.
And so we started sponsoring across gender, which brought a lot of things to my plate that I didn't know I was going to get as a result of sponsoring women. I've kind of backed off on it now. I think I've had my taste of it because there's also some places where I see why I do it,
Yeah.
and I'll see why the challenges are there.
Yes.
And one girl I sponsored for a while, I was friends with her husband, and it's just funny business, man, to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Dan, most of my clients are women, and I feel you. I'm looking forward to working with more men. No
yeah,
offense, ladies. Love you guys, mean it. But it's just it's and women, I think right now in particular, they're not doing the thing you did. Their TV's plugged in, they're very stressed out, and it's a particularly challenging time to be cool with my fellow females, shall we say.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
There
I
is
feel
some.
you. Yeah.
I got. I was married for 17 years, and we got divorced 10 years ago, which is exactly how long I've been sober. So I got sober right after that. I'm sure it had something to
Yeah.
do with it. The the criminal case, and then the divorce stuff and all that. I mean, life got 2014 was a suck ass year for Dan.
Yeah.
I was looking at prison. I was getting divorced, losing my kids, which, today I understand. I should have lost them for a little while until I got better, but I lost that too. Uh, as back a long time ago, started going down to some a Native American lady in Alabama once a month and
Yeah.
doing plant, not when we say plant medicine, most people are thinking ayahuasca or mushrooms and that kind of stuff, right?
That's
But
not what
there's
it
also,
means. Yeah.
well, you know what I mean? That's kind of become
Yes.
what they're, when you
I
hear it
know.
used on podcasts, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking
I
about
know.
tinctures and flower X. And she started
Herbs. You can make just a nice
herbs.
herbal tea, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she started making tinctures and started a little business. And of course, back then I was in no kind of headspace to be even thinking out, it's like, if that make you
Yeah.
happy, cool. But I think completely different about that now.
Yeah.
And we're really good friends. And she would have,
That's
she wouldn't
fantastic.
have she wouldn't have pissed on me if I was on fire 10 years ago. But we are a pretty good team still today. And we're good friends. Um, but where I was going with that is that over the past 10 years, I've tried to date and I've give up on it.
I asked my husband, who's 11 years older than me, because we've only been married 4 years now. And I said, how did you do it? How did you date women? Because I'm having some interactions out there. There is a thing with women where I think subconsciously they think because they're not a man, it's not abuse. There's a lack of responsibility in the social contract that I personally noticed that I don't appreciate very much. And so I asked him about it, and he made a very dark joke. It was very funny, but very inappropriate. And I was like, how did you do it? Like, how did you time and again put yourself in that slingshot? Just because I need help. I was asking him for real advice on how I get back in the saddle and I deal with the women in my life. And he said, well, it's really simple. You just get a bunch of duct tape, and some chloroform. You take them out to a forest preserve, and the joke writes itself. And I had a good, solid belly laugh. I thought that was my husband would hurt a fly. Trust me, our chicken got attacked by a hawk the other day, and he and I were in tears. Like, we love everything that's alive, but it's women have been uniquely targeted, I think, by a bit of a thought reform experiment happening socially in the West. And that's a very broad general term. But I've noticed it, and I'm not dating them. I have my best friend who edits my podcast is a straight man. He really could use some companionship. It would be very good for him in a variety of ways. And he's like, well, what do I do? I was like, honestly, like, you're going into the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, man. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And
Yeah.
for you trying to maintain inner peace too, that must be a special sticky wicket.
Yeah, because that's what was happening in both of those things. There was stuff I just wasn't willing to put up with. And I know at some level in
Yeah.
relationship, there's going to be a certain amount of that. I mean, to just be in perfect alignment with one another, I think would be impossible, just like escaping trauma.
I have
But
a good friend who's a lesbian. She's very open. I'm not speaking out of school. And she's a public figure and does what I do. She reads tarot cards. She's very cool, and she is sober. And I asked her, I was like, "How's that going for you? You know, with women where they are right now?" And she's like, "I got to tell you, it's a trip to go on a first date with women dead sober." She's like, "There aren't enough." I was like, "We should give you a merit badge or something for going in like that," because there is that social lubricant thing, the numbing out, the disassociating
mhm,
you mentioned, that I think helps people ignore red flags in people. I think a
yeah,
lot of marriages should have never happened because everybody's not emotionally sober. We come full circle on that. They're not. And it's a weird time out there. So I wish I had better advice for you.
yeah,
I'm just
well,
happy I locked it in when I did,
yeah,
and I'm going to try and make this work come hell or high water for as long as humanly possible.
yep. I don't think you need to have that attitude too.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I just, I was down at the cabin this weekend and was, sitting around and thinking it would be nice to have somebody with me. This
Yeah.
would be last night it snowed. Yesterday evening it snowed, and then we're out in that forest atmosphere with the snow falling, and it's just
Beautiful.
beautiful, and it's an awesome place.
Yeah.
My father and I built that log cabin in 1999, and it's awesome. It's just plain awesome. I'm sitting out in the field last night, pretending to hunt, and this about 45 minutes. I looked at the timestamp on my video, and then when it actually starts sitting there, and maybe 8 foot off of my left leg, just at a little bit of an angle, something landed on the ground. And I caught it out of it was right in my peripheral vision, but I just didn't like see it. And when I looked, it was an owl. An owl had just sat down, and it was going after something in the grass. And
Yeah.
I've slowed the video down to see if it actually got something or not. But we had that moment for a minute because it was just doing its thing, right? And then it's sideways to me, and it's doing its thing, and then it goes whoa, and then we hold like about a 5 minute stare with one another. And you were talking about totem animals, I think, or does
Yeah.
it that kind of stuff?
Owl's a big one.
And I see a lot of owls on a regular basis, but that's the first time. And I had a moment with that owl yesterday, and then just a few minutes later, it starts snowing. Was just like I could just feel my batteries just on full blast, fast charge. Uh,
Yeah, owl I associate with my grandmother, who I was very close to.
mm,
And owls are one of just a few animals, crow and fox being the only others, that they say can go to the land of the dead and come back.
oh
So they're
yeah,
messengers from dearly departed loved ones. And it's
mm,
an ancestral protection thing. It's very sweet. They're a very big deal. And I'm very happy that you have owl. It's
I
tremendous.
was out a few years ago one night, and I was coyote hunting in the dark, and I wasn't pretending. Uh,
Yeah.
they and on those hunts, and twice in one night, I had an owl basically attack me because I was blowing a call on me. And look, they
Yeah.
have
A
electronic
coyote
calls that
call.
you're supposed
Yeah.
to put away from you, and you put away from you. And uh, have some sense, and I turn on my headlamp, and that owl put its brakes on 5 feet away from me because it was coming down, and it'd tear you up if it didn't know.
And
I
they're
know
big.
and this
Yeah.
was huge owl, and it put the brakes on, and I basically lit up into the tree branch and then took off. And then an hour or so later, I said, "No, I'm gonna put my speaker out there like I'm supposed to, and not be lazy." And I hung it on a tree branch, and I'm hitting the collar on it, and all of a sudden, it's got a little green LED on it, and it falls to the ground. My I was like, I hung that on a good branch and hit the light, and an owl had attacked my speaker. It happened twice,
Very funny.
one night. I've had quite a few interesting encounters with owls over the years.
They're powerful medicine, really, truly. And yeah, I every time I get an owl visit, it's very comforting to me. It feels like a direct communication. I actually named one of my tinctures "Dead Grandma"
Did you?
because she had a very good sense of humor. A lot of childhood trauma. That's how you get a good sense of humor, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. That's how you get
Mm,
that. And she had it in spades. And it's marigold because marigold, puts you in touch with ancestors, the Day of the
mm.
Dead, and all of that. And even planting marigold in your garden keeps pests away. It's that protection energy.
I've heard
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, it's so I like it. Not everything that's dark is bad or sad. Sometimes it can
Yeah.
be happy. So
Yeah.
this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking a whole bunch.
And
You want
seriously, if you want to come on the podcast, I'll send you a
uh,
link. I'd love to
send me
do
it.
that.
Yeah, let's talk about it and figure out a time that'll work for both of us. I'd be more than happy to come
Perfect.
talk some more.
Cool.
That's kind of a thing that happens a bit. You do a little cross pollination. Uh,
Yeah. I like to see if I vibe with somebody. That's my
yeah,
little, I like to talk to them. And then if I want to keep talking to them, that's what we do.
yeah. I have this will be episode 339 or something. I cheated on the numbers for a little bit doing something, so it's not quite that many podcasts, but it's someplace around 300. And I've never had. I think I've been one time I had a problem with a yoga teacher, and probably shouldn't have said that out loud. Uh, but
It's the truth.
she's probably not watching anymore. And it was that same thing, man. I just wanted to turn everything off and run, and it was the one on one. We was actually face to face. But otherwise, I do these things on the fly. Like I don't really know much about you, but it just keeps on working. Oh,
Fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah,
super cool. So we'll put some stuff in the show notes, how people can get a hold of you and all that kind of
sure.
stuff. I think I have everything I need out of these emails.
Great.
Your
Yeah, I'm sure. And the main thing is just my website and my email's on there, and anybody can just send me a message. There's no assistant. It's just me. I'll write back to
Yeah,
you.
that same
Yeah.
thing here. It's just me. I don't like to do any editing, and I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, um, I handle all the correspondence. Gets a little
Fantastic.
overwhelming
Yeah.
with your self-employed and having a couple different podcasts I'm doing, and then I had a whole group of 12-step people. My phone just I have to do not disturb it on a regular basis because
You're a
I wouldn't
busy
get anything
man.
done. I don't know
Yep.
how it's all getting done somehow. All right. Well,
Great.
I've enjoyed it a ton. Have a good rest
Thank
of
you.
your Sunday, and
You
I look
too.
forward to talking again.
Great. I'll be in touch. Thank you so much. Take
Well,
care.
you too. Bye bye.